and welcome to the Doofcast, a film and TV podcast from Doof Media. My name is Scott Daly, and I am your host. Matt is out this week. He watched a 4-hour video about some Star Wars hotel in Disney and decided to go there, and I didn't have the heart to tell him that closed down. But he's going to be there for the week, and he's left me here to my own devices, so I'm breaking my long-standing contractual obligation and talking about the video game EverQuest without him. And again, but I'm not just going to be talking about EverQuest this week. I want to talk about a thing that I've never been able to talk about Matt with, which is other MMORPGs, because EverQuest is the only one he played. So I have a lot to say about this topic, and I am not alone in this. I have my good friend and fellow World of Warcraft guild mate, I guess is the phrase we'll call it, is joining me this week. Welcome, Tevin. Welcome to Tevin Crody. He's a longtime MMO player and my good friend. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So this is going to be good. This is it's going to be a little bit of a different conversation from the types we normally do on this show. I don't know how many of our listeners play MMORPGs or have heard about MMORPGs, but probably at least a little bit if they've listened to the show at any amount of time, because we talk about EverQuest and we talk about games fairly often when they come up. But MMOs are something special, Tevin, and I really wanted to kind of look at the genre as a whole. And I think the title of this series is going to be The Past, Present, and Future of the MMORPG. I don't know if that's a good title or not, but it's the one I'm going with. And so I wanted to talk about like where the genre came from, our history with it, and our current history with it, and then where we think this thing's gonna go, because video games, online gaming has changed a lot in the past 20-25 years, and it's still changing. And this is a genre that is kind of right in the middle of it, right?
Yeah, and it is kind of wild. I mean, it's really just changed with the internet, right? So kind of like the way that I've seen it is, and I don't know, maybe I've been stewing on this for a little bit too long, but when the internet was first like being brought to the public or whatever, you had like chat rooms and things you would go in and talk to people, and like I feel like MMOs were the first like game that really tried to achieve that same feeling. So
yeah, I mean, we've talked about EverQuest a lot, how it was kind of just a big interactive chat room that we played, because the combat in that game was so slow and so deliberate and so like non-interactive almost. Like you played a warrior in that game, you pushed A to auto attack, and then you pressed a kick button every few seconds, and that was about it. So there's plenty of time to type on your keyboard and stuff like that. And that is, of course, not the case anymore. But talk to me about kind of your history with this genre and these games. Like, where did you start? You're younger than me, so I don't think you started quite when I started. But what games did you play?
Yeah, so I guess starting out the first MMO, I'm just gonna call it an MMO, a multiplayer RPG, because it isn't really massive. Is probably RuneScape. Was the first one I played, and a lot like with EverQuest, all of that is just keyboard and mouse, and it's mainly just clicking on things on the screen. So your entire left hand is just free to type whenever you want to. So that's where I kind of get this like feeling, kind of like you were saying with EverQuest, where it's like this was all just essentially just a chat room that you could interact with. And from there I went to World of Warcraft, and ever since World of Warcraft, I've really kind of gotten into a lot of all of these 3D RPGs, I guess. So like I've played a bunch of the old quote unquote WoW killer games. So like WildStar, I've played New World, and a bunch of the older ones that people probably aren't as familiar with, like Lineage 2 and things like that. Aeon.
Yeah. I think that's cool. I think you've definitely played more than I have. For those that don't know, my past with this is starting with EverQuest, the original MMO. Although I guess I don't know. There's a lot of Ultima Online fans that would take umbrage with that. I think both of those games were kind of operating at roughly the same time. I think Ultima had a little bit of a head start. But I think EverQuest is the one that really defined what the genre has become, because EverQuest so much defined what World of Warcraft was, and that was so pivotal to the entire genre. And then I went on to I played EQ2, I played World of Warcraft for a long time. I played Final Fantasy 14 when that came out. I switched to that. I actually quit WoW in 2010, I think it was, or whenever Kata was nearing the end. I quit playing World of Warcraft. I just was in a time in my life where I didn't really have time for those type of games anymore. And I only came back a few years ago, and got to witness how much the game has changed. And apparently, I missed like the worst parts of the game, so good on me. Um, but
You definitely did miss the worst parts of the game. I will confirm that.
yeah, I think it's cool because I come from this place with World of Warcraft of not playing it for a very long time, coming back to it and seeing all these things as kind of with fresh and new eyes. And I feel like I like the game a lot more than the average World of Warcraft player. It seems like the average WoW player is a person that actually hates the game and is enjoys being part of the community that belittles the game. And I think it's a pretty good game, and a pretty influential game, and a pretty important game. But so that's what I'm still playing right now. We I've gotten so into World of Warcraft that I'm now also playing Classic, which I know you are as well, because
Mhm.
Classics just had their re-release of the Cataclysm expansion. For those that don't know, in 2019 was it? They just started re-releasing old versions of the game. They did just the vanilla version of the game in 2019, and they've been slowly releasing them since then. The third expansion, Cataclysm, just came out a couple weeks ago, and we're both playing that right now. So not only am I playing the current version of the game, but I'm also playing the version that was out when I was playing the game last back in 2010. So
You have vendettas
I,
to clear up.
I do. I have to kill those bosses that broke up our guild. But I guess what I wanted to talk about here was I think one of the things that's really interesting about this genre is how we define the genre, because I think anyone that's played any of these games probably has an image of their head of what it means when you say MMORPG, right? And my definition of that is defined by my time with EverQuest, which means I think a big sprawling world where everyone kind of exists simultaneously in that world. You explore together, you group up with each other, and then split off, and there's this economy that's kind of run by the players. And EverQuest was much more of a sandbox version than a lot of the games that exist today. But the thing I find so interesting is so many of the things within World of Warcraft specifically have been just brought to other games, and so many games are online now, and there's so many of these live service type games now that it's
Right.
like, what does it mean to be an MMORPG? Like what it first of all, what did it mean back when it was first dubbed, and then what does it mean now in 2024? And I'm not even sure there's a clear answer to that. What do you think?
I definitely think it's shifted. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So when it first came out, the way that I would say an MMORPG kind of brought people together was the fact that it was near impossible to do anything by yourself.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
you had to have other people. And so like it forced this player to player interaction, which, whereas I'm kind of getting that like chat room feel, right? Like
Yeah.
you are
Yeah.
forced to interact with other people. It is really shifted from that now. The
Yeah.
amount of people who play MMOs solo is actually insane
Yeah.
nowadays. I mean, even for example, when you first came back to World of Warcraft, uh, you were doing specific content by yourself without anybody else, nobody, going with you. You were just playing with random people.
Yep. Yep.
And so, like, that is the perfect example of how I feel like this is totally shifted from being something that was like meant to kind of bring this chat room kind of feel to life to more of uh, I don't really know how to put this other than a game, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way of putting it, because it's like these early MMO games were they were games obviously, but they were experiences, and they were like, there's a reason why these games were so addictive. It's because it's not just because it required an insane amount of time investment, which it certainly did, but it's
Oh,
because like you had that social interaction in there. And it's not to say that like these modern games don't have social interaction. Obviously, you and I are talking right now because we socially interacted in the game.
yeah.
We met through playing the game. We met through guild because you're absolutely right that I came back to WoW and was just kind of playing it solo, and I got to a point where I had rejoined the game at a couple moments throughout the time, and I just kind of played it solo for a little bit and got bored and left. And this time I kind of decided, okay, if I'm going to give this thing like one last shot, I want to see what it's like to raid in modern WoW, and I want to see what it's like to raid with a group of people that like I know and are like scheduled. And so I started looking for guilds, found a guild, ended up you joined the same guild not too long after me. We all just kind of met each other through that. Um, and that is extremely social. It certainly is, but it's a different kind of social activity than the early games were for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And that's kind of where I feel like everything is going towards though now. It's like you group up, you come together to do some of the harder stuff in the game, right? Like
Hmm.
you are able to do uh, let's just call it end game content by yourself. But if you really want to strive to do like the hardest stuff that a game has to offer in an MMORPG, you're probably going to need other people, which
Yeah,
is where
even still, even
guilds,
today, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that's where guilds and everything come in. Um, and so I feel like that's kind of where MMOs rest now
Hmm.
is you don't necessarily need everybody to come together just to get through the day to day, you know, leveling by yourself or whatever. And I
Yeah.
feel like WoW is really what pioneered this, right? Like WoW is probably the first time where you could just log in by yourself and just level, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't have to have help to complete quests or do something specific. Like you
Hmm.
could play versions of the game or areas of the game by yourself, which I think is kind of what's given it its longevity.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that was a pretty huge shift at the time in the game, and now it's really funny for me, an older person, to see like people thinking back and looking back towards classic. Like, there's been this big push in the WoW community for classic hardcore, which is you die and you're done, which is a version of the game I would just never play because that sounds insane to me. Like investing all this time into something and then just losing it when one bad mistake happens or one heal is missed or something just
Your internet
sounds,
goes out.
yeah, exactly. That sounds awful. But there's a lot of people heavily invested in it, and it's really interesting to me watching these people like wax nostalgically about the original version of World of Warcraft. When I remember at the time playing that game and it being this seismic shift from EverQuest, and people being like, "What? You don't have to group anymore, so no one's going to talk to each other anymore." And it's like now the version of the game in WoW, which was still pretty single player favored, but I still think you had to group up a little bit more than modern WoW. There wasn't nearly as much matchmaking making services in the game that there are now. Um, it's funny seeing that, and I do think that WoW's success. It's we're coming up on year 20 of this game, which is insane. Like, that is something that I just when the game came out, I never would have thought that possible. I definitely would have thought they would have moved on to a new game like a WoW 2 or just other games. I just didn't think that like
Mhm.
EverQuest is still releasing new expansions. Like, that game came out in 1999. That's
That
that's
is
insane
wild
to
to me.
me. Yeah, and there's still people playing it. Like, I subscribe to the MMORPG subreddit, which, by the way, don't do that, because it's mostly just a bunch of old people whining about how MMOs are not as good as they were uh 20 years ago. Um but like there's a lot of people that like EverQuest just released their new progression server, which like I think every 6 months or so they just open up a new server that starts in the base version of the game and then slowly at a set time interval like opens up to the next expansion and just kind of keeps going until it catches up to whatever the 30th expansion they're on or whatever ridiculous number. But there's like
Yeah.
a lot of buzz around that. People are really excited and really enjoying it. I'm like, how is that possible? um, but I think the games that succeeded, and World of Warcraft specifically in this, are games that like correctly looked at how video gaming was changing over the course of the past 2 decades and and responded to that within the game. Like World of Warcraft has become more user friendly. It takes less time than it used to. Um, it is simultaneously easier and more difficult than it has ever been before.
Mhm.
And it clearly respects your time, and it's because the majority of the people that play it are 30-year-old dudes or 38-year-old dudes in my case with kids that just don't have 8 hours a day to commit to this game. And its ability to recognize like what's going on in the video gaming industry, not just in MMOs, but like looking at the battle royales, looking at like how just online competitive gameplay has become one of the biggest things in gaming, and saying,
Mhm.
okay, we need to do something like this within our own idea. Like, I think I've briefly talked about Mythic Plus on the show before, but not in a lot of detail. And I don't want to go into too much detail here, but it is a persistent, basically endless 5-player dungeon content mode of the game that came out 8 years ago or so. And it's the most brilliant idea they've ever come up with. And I think that was a response to like looking out at like, the lobby based PvE games that were existing at the time, and just recognizing this is what people want and we have to adapt to that. And I mean, it's pretty remarkable actually.
Yeah, I definitely think that, I wholly agree with you. We've talked about this ad nauseum, but the repeatable, constant repeatable content that gives you something to do other than
Yeah.
like the weekly or daily stuff that you can do in the game, and
Hmm.
then you have to wait until the next week to do it. Definitely really drives things forward. And I think that while gaming has shifted to kind of be um, more homogenized, I guess is the best way to put it. And that people have expectations as far as like, I'm starting this game and I know that this is going to be a difficult process. And if a game doesn't have that kind of mentality around it, then, we almost just assume that this is, I'm going to call it a casual friendly game. The dad that works 60 hours a week and has four kids can get stuff done in this game. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I,
I
I
think
I
that's
really think I just want to hold myself up as an example of this. If you have played these games in the past and quit them because you didn't think you had enough time, you enjoy the game and want to play the game, but you don't have enough time to play an MMO. I have 2 children, a full-time job, and a podcast, 2 podcasts that I do every week, and I find time to play this game. And like I don't play that often. I mean, I play like nights, usually pretty late, like like 10 to midnight, sometimes 1, um every few days, and I get a lot done in this game. I do. We've cleared all the raids, not on the most hardest difficulty, but we're in the top 1% of people that do Mythic Plus. So like if you want to play this game, I think it's the most friendly towards players that it's ever been. And I think that's really cool. A lot of people don't like that. There's a lot of people in the WoW community right now, especially with the existence of Classic, that are very much like, this was the best version of the game. And the only way to keep the game, to save the game, is to bring it back to this version of the game. And
yeah.
I just can't handle that opinion. I
I
can't handle it because there's a reason why it changed. Like it's not like Blizzard woke up one day and said, "You know what we should do? We're going to add this thing." And this like it changed out of a need, a demand, a desire, and the data. And like I it drives me crazy. I don't want to spend the whole time talking about World of Warcraft, but it drives me crazy when people say like we need to go back to 40-man rating, and like having to get world buffs, and needing like 3 hours of shit farming before you can do anything you want to do. Ugh.
Yeah, I definitely am in the same boat as you. I feel like it's a pretty unpopular opinion to like the current iteration of World of Warcraft, but I agree. I mean, things were made better for a reason. This
Yeah.
happens in every game. Like I said, I play RuneScape. I still do to this day, and there's currently two versions of that, right? Like there is the version that has lived on and gotten updates and changed and everything. Like, that is one version of the game, and then there's an old school version of the game. The thing that does differently though, is it's still receiving new content updates. So
Hmm.
like while it is like in essence and I don't know, nostalgia factor, you can play this old school version of the game and it is very much so that way. Uh it's still getting new content. And I feel like this is something that a lot of these gaming companies who have successful MMOs, World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy 14, um, hell, even Final Fantasy 11, having these like classic versions of the game that then go on to get like different updates from what
Yeah.
they got instead of just like progressing kind of like World of Warcraft is through classic. I think that's an avenue to having like new content and still catering to the people who want that nostalgia factor.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think World of Warcraft is trying this thing called Season of Discovery right now, which is supposed to sort of be their experiment in that it's going back to the original classic version of the game, but with a twist. We're going to add new things to it, new raids, new abilities, and I think that ultimately is a failed experiment on
Yeah.
their part, but not because the idea itself is bad, but just because of the way they implemented the idea. I don't think worked very well for them. But I totally agree. Like, I think there's always going to be a certain level of nostalgia for this older type of game that was by design more difficult, less user friendly, requiring more commitment, both time and not even skill. Because I think honestly these games were not that hard skill wise. It
No.
was it was a just level of how much time do you have to commit to this. It's not like your like Twitch skill or any kind of uh, rotation difficulty or like boss mechanic difficulty. It didn't exist in those games at the time,
Yeah,
and
I agree.
there's always going to be some desire for that, right?
Yeah, the skill argument and the difficulty is it's really weird because like you talk to somebody who plays like an older version of a game and they say, "Yeah, it was really hard." And you go back and you play these older versions of the game and like it sure is easy to die, but
Yeah,
I'm pressing one button over and over again, Like there is not
yeah,
very much depth to it. Which I think
no,
is one of the things that like has really gotten better as the years have gone on is people realize that video games don't need to be so simple.
hmm,
And you can explain things in a UI or some other way that you can actually make things more complicated. I
yeah,
mean, if you look at any modern MMO, right? You look at Final Fantasy 14, or you look at World of Warcraft, or any of these new MMOs. Elder Scrolls Online is another good example. Um, the bosses that you fight in just PvE content are they would have been impossible in 2004 when WoW
yeah,
came
yeah.
out. So,
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I guess I want to maybe take a step back here and kind of think about how we define the genre a little bit, because I think there are like important like the important mainstays of what an MMORPG is. I think lean heavily on the RPG part of that equation, right? Like you have a character that is going to be kind of constantly advancing through gaining experience, equipment, new abilities, and that's going to be persistent and ongoing as they explore the world. I think the way that that's been done has changed a little bit. Like the way you discover new abilities, the way you get new equipment, like all these things have changed and morphed over time, but
um,
essentially that's always true, right? That like you're always going to have, you make a character, you pick a class or a job or whatever. You advance by killing enemies, by doing quests, by exploring the world. You gain new abilities, you move on to harder areas, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's like the basic formula of these games.
mhm.
And that content is divided into, like, as you said, solo content, group content. Like we've dubbed raids the massive group content. But really, that's the formula. I think the interesting thing about that is, so many video games now have brought RPG elements into them because they're live services games, and having loot and experience and things like that are a great way to have persistent services that, like, sometimes I sit back and I look at like the landscape, And I look at, like, I know Riot is working on their own MMORPG that's just been like indefinitely shelved. We'll see if it ever comes out. I know there's Ashes of Creation, I think, is another one that's been heavily touted as like, this is this really big MMO that we're working on, and it's going to be huge. And then we've got our two big mainstays in WoW and Final Fantasy 14. But I look at like where more games could fit into this environment, and I'm like, well, I feel like a lot of the people that would have played this game and would have played games like it have been brought into other games that have added online features and have added RPG features. And the question I have for you is like, where does an MMO fit in that world anymore?
As far as like the current state of gaming.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that the one big thing that an MMO brings to the table that not every other game does, and this, I mean, it kind of gets achieved by some other games, but you really hit on it where you have you have one character, you have one thing that you are continuing to persist through, make better, make stronger. So I think that with that, that is really what's kind of driving you and giving you that place in an
Hmm.
MMORPG. And the RPG elements of like constantly changing, I think, is the other part of this.
Yeah,
Now there are solo RPGs that really achieve this. You can think of like any Bethesda game, Skyrim,
sure.
Oblivion, Fallout. Um, but the the added complexity of being able to make things more difficult to the point where you have to interact with other people, I think is where the MMO part of it really ties together. So
Yeah.
it's really for the people who want the RPG elements, but also want the social aspect. I think is kind of where MMOs should really lie in
Yeah.
today's like gaming niche.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. Like, because I think of like some of the biggest games, the biggest multiplayer games out there right now. Like, it's either first person shooter competitive games, it's League of Legends or those MOBA type competitive games, or like the battle royale type, the Fortnites, the Valorants. And those are all like, they're social in that you're on a team playing against another team, but it's not social in that like you're in this persistent world. Even if like in like, it's interesting because in modern day World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy, I think this is true as well. So much of the actual content of the game is instanced that
Mhm.
the world itself, at a certain point, ceases to matter. Essentially, like
Yep.
in when I get on retail WoW right now, what do? Like, I'm in the main city. I like go to the auction house to buy my consumables. I find a group, and then we fly to the instance, and that's my interaction with the open world. And like, I see the other people, and I'll occasionally have to interact with someone through like, I need some trade skill thing made for me, and so I'll just broadcast it out and have someone respond to me. But essentially, like I think an important distinction to make here is, I feel like EverQuest and the early versions of MMOs were like, what if we do Dungeons and Dragons, but it's a bunch of people playing D&D at the same time. And
Yeah.
so like the idea of getting your group of 5 people together and delving into a dungeon was not about, hey, let's tackle these hard bosses, let's improve our time, improve our score. It was, let's wander around in this massive underground cavern for a few hours and like, yeah, fight stuff, like get treasure, do these kind of things. And that's a fun experience.
Mhm.
But it's really gone from the MMO experience now. Like, I,
Yeah.
I don't I don't think that exists in an MMO format anymore.
I agree, and in part, I would love to see. I would love somebody smarter than me to do a case study on this, honestly, because I feel like part of this is due to the fact that, like, as the internet has become more and more accepted, search engines have gotten better, and like social media has become a thing and everything like that. Like, we are becoming as like a gaming society this conglomerate of just trying to optimize everything out of a game,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Optimize the fun out of it, essentially,
Uh-huh.
right? So you don't no longer do you have to. ask people to join your group in World of Warcraft or even Final Fantasy, there's tools to do that for you. You don't even
Mhm.
have to talk to them. You just get put into a group with somebody.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that that's in part kind of what's happened. And I think that that really is just due to the like optimizing everything.
Yeah.
Because like, why would I spend time, spamming when I can just click a button and join a group, you know?
Yeah, and I guess the question is that a good thing? Because my co-host Matt would say no, that like the reason why EverQuest functioned so well as a experience is because it was this incredibly difficult, like, to traverse world that you needed a group of people. The dungeons were designed to be these long winding caverns. Modern dungeons in these games are essentially a straight line,
Yeah.
with difficult encounters along the way. And even Mythic Plus, which is a mode that you and I talked about that we love so much, is time based. It is the point, the goal is to get to the end as quickly as possible with the least
Mhm.
amount of deaths as possible, and then you win and you get your prize at the end. That's what it is. And I love that model. I do. But there is something that's gone from like the EverQuest experience of like, hey, like we were just wandering as a group of 5 people and we found this cave and let's go see what's in the cave. I don't know what's in the cave. Let's go find out what's in the cave. And it's this massive underground complex. And
Mhm.
that like that always has not existed, because even in the early days of like EverQuest, the internet was a thing, and I had a big
Yeah.
binder that had maps on of every single zone in EverQuest when I was playing it in 2000. So I still had that, but there definitely that sense of exploration.
Mhm.
And I talked about this on my the Elden Ring episode. That is, those type of games are the only games that exist now that have captured that like sense of like, let's hop into a place and explore and have no idea where I'm going, and I'm lost and terrified, and the feeling I got when playing EverQuest is achieved by Elden Ring in many ways. But of course, that's a single player game. That's, well, sort of. I mean, there is ways of like co-op, but it's
Right.
not an MMO. Like, it's not built to be that type of game. And
Yeah.
I guess where I'm going with this very long-winded train of thought is like, is there a space for that in modern gaming? Because I kind of think the answer is no, and I think World of Warcraft Season of Discovery almost proves that.
Yeah, so as far as like the sense of exploration in modern gaming, um, I mean every MMO continues to try to achieve this, in my opinion. Like they don't just outwardly tell you how to get somewhere. I mean, obviously, quest markers or whatever can tell you how to get somewhere, but like they don't give you this unveiled map by default. Like there's
Sure.
add-ons and stuff to do that in World of Warcraft, but like there is this sense. I think it's the optimization of things that's like causing us to not. So I don't actually think that there will ever be this sense of exploration in an MMO again where there's,
Yeah.
millions and millions of people playing, um because you're going to have somebody tell you exactly where to go, exactly what to do, unless you're not looking for it, right? So which is why I think you can achieve that in a single player game, because you don't necessarily need to be looking at like guides on how to do things or ask other players how to do things when you're playing a single player game. You can kind of just take that experience on yourself. Not to say
Yeah.
some people don't look at guides or consume content about single player games they're playing. I'm an example of somebody who does, but I think that that's why you're able to achieve it in like an Elden Ring, or really any FromSoft game. But it's probably not got a place in MMOs, and I don't really think, even as much as these companies are continuing to try to do that,
Yeah.
it's probably just never going to happen again.
So do you think the MMO responded to the change in the gaming populace, or like the gaming populace was responding to the change in designs in the MMO?
I think that the MMOs probably changed based off of the gaming populace. I think attention spans got shorter, and
Mhm.
therefore things needed to be more streamlined.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And I think just generally, like, every time I go back and play an old game, like, the amount of patience I have with, like, figuring it out and even just taking the time that it takes sometimes, it's like I don't have time for this. I don't, like,
Mhm.
and that like I remember days in EverQuest where like my evening in EverQuest would be I post up in the main city and shout that I'm looking for a group to join to go, and I did that for 2 hours and I didn't find a group, and I was just like while I was looking for a group I was like chatting with people, interacting and doing the whole social aspect of the game, and then I just okay, I guess tonight's not the night. I'm not going to find a group, and I just log off the game, and like
Mhm.
that to me now would make me quit the game. Like I that would just drive me crazy to the point I'm like, what the fuck are we doing? Like that's ridiculous. Like that I want to play. I want to play the game.
I think
And
that is like really compounded by the fact that like you don't have a ton of time to play anymore, right?
yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
So
definitely. So and I think that's like it's interesting because it's not as if the gaming populace in general is aging. I mean, I guess it technically is because like everyone of our generation gaming was much more like prevalent and normalized, and we're all getting older and the younger generations are still also playing games, so it's just like the average age of gamers kind of just keeps dragging upwards naturally, and I think in mmos it's like the place where like that is compounded. Like I forgot, I read somewhere what like the average age of a World of Warcraft player was and it's like way higher than any other video game. Part of that is because it's 20 years old, but I think part of that is just because this game attracts a certain type of player. Like I think it's a player that's like kind of sort of nostalgic for that old school RuneScape EverQuest thing we're talking about,
mhm.
but also still likes the quicker, you know, form of the game that exists today. I don't know. It's really it's really interesting to me, and I don't have a clear answer here of like what is good and what is bad. I think like these games are so different from the way they were 20 years
Mhm.
ago that it's almost like it's a weird thing of still putting them in the same genre together. Like calling both EverQuest and retail modern WoW an MMORPG is like they're completely different games. They're built on the same general idea, but they're essentially two different experiences.
Yeah, and I look, I think that that's mainly just because, like I said, that there has been a shift in gamers. So,
Yeah, yeah,
for your first point, where WoW has a higher average player age than a lot of other games, I think that this is in part due to really attention span stuff. Like
yeah. Hmm.
kids tend to have a lower attention span, and WoW, in essence, does take quite a bit of attention to get your character to a level at which it can, do things at the end game. Um,
True.
so I think that's probably why WoW is kind of shifted upwards. That and exactly what you said, it is 20 years old. Who is first coming into gaming and being like, oh yeah, World of Warcraft, that's the game I want to play. Like, other than, oh, my dad plays it, what reason does somebody who's just now getting into gaming have to play World of Warcraft, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
um, but I think as far as like the the fact that EverQuest and retail World of Warcraft share a genre but are so different, is just the fact that um, it these games are realizing that their player base is getting older,
Mhm.
and they do need to respect their time a little bit more. While there are things in World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy or any of these modern MMOs that kind of feel like they don't respect your time, for the most part, if you look at it as a whole, it is way more time efficient to play these games nowadays than it was 20 years ago.
Oh my god, yes. As a person who spent literally all one weekend in high school farming one item for my epic weapon quest in EverQuest, like you definitely don't have to do that like in this game at all. Like there's still grinds and there's still farms, but they're almost entirely optional. And it's usually just for like cool cosmetic stuff with a couple exceptions. But
Mhm.
I think that's just inherently true, and like I think that's a very very good thing. But it does strike me like I wonder if there's so I haven't played Baldur's Gate 3, so you'll have to tell me if this is like is there when I talk about like the old school EverQuest experience, the old school RuneScape type experience, is there a modern game that captures that specific itch that maybe is just not an MMO, but like because I know Baldur's Gate is can be a multiplayer game. Like you can play that game co-op, right?
Mhm.
Um, is that scratching that particular itch for you?
So yes and no. Really, the itch that Baldur's Gate scratched for me is, I play Dungeons and Dragons,
Sure.
and so it was really cool to see that brought to life in a video game,
Hmm.
and then all of the exploration, and figuring out, different ways to go about it, were very interesting. As far as exploration goes, um, yes and no. I mean, it's a pretty expansive map, and there's a lot of things to do and explore, and there's a lot of hidden secrets, but,
Hmm.
like, it is nothing compared to Elden Ring when it comes to exploration. Like, FromSoft did an amazing job at hiding things in plain sight,
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
other different stuff to make, like, your 15th dungeon, it's still a dungeon, you still get the same feeling when you go into it, but it's different, you know?
Yeah.
And Baldur's Gate is more of, um, I don't know. It's more of a shock the first time you go through it, and then following after that, it's just like, oh well, I made this decision this time. I want to try a different one the next time. So it doesn't really fill that same like sense of discovery itch, at
Yeah.
least for me.
Yeah. That's fair. That's fair. What one thing that as you were talking about that, I thought of like another kind of shift in the MMO genre, which is the idea that your character is like an extension of you. Like you are you identify with your you're literally playing a role, right? Like
Mhm.
back in EverQuest, it takes so long to level, so much time to get up, like that you will not be re-rolling, you will not be switching classes. Like you pick this guy, and this is your guy for the foreseeable future. And therefore you identify with them, and they are kind of your identity within the game. I think the biggest kind of shock I had when coming back to WoW was how much that's not the case. That it's so easy to level, it's so easy to switch classes. Like if the tank you were playing starts underperforming because of changes, and you don't like that anymore, and you want to have a more powerful tank, like switching has never been easier. That like the individual class, like what they look like, what their name is, what like race they are, like doesn't matter anymore.
Mhm.
And like because when I was a young kid, I always was like, oh man, it's weird, all these dudes playing female characters, that's weird. um Nowadays it's not, like, and arguably probably wasn't ever back then, I was just a stupid teenager. But like it's just like, well, that character's not me. Like this is not who I'm role playing as, this is not who I'm identifying as. It's just an avatar I'm using to do this thing, and I happen to think this avatar looks cooler than that avatar, and that's what
Yeah.
I'm doing. That like that's a big change, because they are these are still role playing games, they are. It's just like that RP of the RPG, I think, is minimized in these modern games.
Yeah, I think that is one thing Baldur's Gate does extremely well. Is you
Mm-hmm.
really do like you get immersed in your character and the
Sure.
decisions you're
Yeah.
making and everything like that. Decision making is let's just say it's dead when it comes to MMOs. Like the RPG element of MMORPG is the fact that you are constantly getting stronger and
Yeah.
getting, more and more layers added to this thing that you are playing.
Sure.
Um and I think that as far as like the re-rolling and everything goes, um and feel free if this is just wrong, correct me, but I feel like that might have been somewhat pioneered by the whole Final Fantasy 11 job system. The
Could
the
be. Yeah.
fact that you have one character that you can play anything on, right? You don't have to have a different character. Uh, Really kind of brought to light probably the fact that, hey, maybe people want to play more than one thing, and so we should make that easier. And I think that you do lose that kind of extension of yourself aspect of the RPG element, but it does allow you to experience the game in a lot different ways potentially. Like if you play, you know, a damage dealing spec versus a healer versus somebody who is tanking, those are all vastly different roles, and you
Yeah.
experience the game in a different way. So
Hmm.
maybe that is something that, you know, a lot of companies saw as a positive and tried to cater towards.
Sure. That's a good point because my Final Fantasy 14 character looks like me. and, and my character in World of Warcraft is this lady elf, or one of my characters at least. Uh, and I just, it never even occurred to me to do that in Final Fantasy. And it's because it's like a one-stop shop, or this is my guy. This is me. And
Mhm,
no matter what role I'm playing or job I'm playing, it's still going to be this person.
mhm.
Which has been difficult because when I play healer in that game, all the freaking healer clothes are definitely made for women, and they look goofy as shit on the male characters. Like it just doesn't look good at all, and I hate it.
I love your dress.
You don't like it? Why can't I be a healer in pants? That's what I want to know. Justice for healer pants.
Yeah, no, I really think that that's kind of the crux of the issue, though, is like if you make it to where you can have multiple characters, you no longer have this like need to feel like you
Hmm.
are that connected to one thing. Whereas
Yeah.
like in Final Fantasy, uh, you have one character, and that one character can do all of the different classes or jobs or, you know, whatever the game's calling it. You have a lot more sense of ownership over that, the look of that model. So I think that that is a very good way to solve the issue of like feeling like the character is an extension of yourself.
Yeah.
Um, that being said, there's still not, as far as like dialogue or like meaningful choices go, there's
Yeah.
none of that in MMOs. And I honestly, I don't really know if there truly ever really has been. Like you can
Yeah.
pick like
Yeah.
one faction over another, for example, in World of Warcraft, Burning Crusade, you could pick, you
Hmm.
know, one or the other faction at endgame, right?
That
But
was always kind of connected to player power, and like
yeah.
the lore of it never mattered.
Mhm.
That's an interesting point because story, and this is a podcast in which we mostly talk about stories. We love stories. We love talking about stories. These games technically have stories, right? MMOs technically have stories, some more than others. Um, but the thing that's so interesting is I go to most of the media and content I consume for the storytelling. These games are the exception. Like I play Final Fantasy 14, which a diehard Final Fantasy 14 player will tell you that has the best story of any MMORPG ever. It's so good. It's a great story. It's the best story. Yay story. I think it's okay. And like I don't play that game for the story. I don't play WoW for the story. I will say, and I do think there's a difference between lore and story, right? Like, I think the story of World of Warcraft is often told very badly, like
Yeah.
like not good. But like the lore of it, I think is really cool. Like walking into like we're playing Kata right now, and walking into a room and seeing Cho'Gall, a character that I know. I don't know the story of what's going on in the Bastion of Twilight. Something bad, Twilight bad, Deathwing bad, us good, gonna kill them. I don't know any of that, but I don't care because one thing I do know is like that's Cho'Gall, and that's a I know the lore of that guy vaguely, and that's pretty cool. Um,
Yeah, that is one thing that Blizzard has extremely like succeeded on extremely well, is like meaningful villains is like huge. And
mhm.
I mean, you can anybody who's played World of Warcraft, you know, they know who Arthas is, they know the Lich King.
Yeah,
So you know, same character, but still, they know Illidan, they know Deathwing, they know Cho'Gall, Sylvanas. Like all of these are names, and in part, I think that that is kind of because it had years of story and lore build up before WoW even became a thing.
yeah, definitely. They were playing with lore that was created for a single player video game experience that was mostly story driven.
Hmm.
I do think like I think WoW has become really into the cutscene storytelling thing,
Yeah.
and that's one thing I noticed coming back to the game after a 12-year break was they tell a lot of their story through cutscenes, and it's It's not good. It's not like I think that like there's some good moments you get in cutscenes, I think, but to primarily try to tell the story of your expansion through these in-game cinematics, I think is just not effective and doesn't work very well.
Hmm.
Um, and they seem really committed to them, and I think it's because they're responding to things like Final Fantasy, in which is all cutscenes all the time, and I have my own problems with those. Um, but like I think leaning more heavily into like the lore of the place instead of like the specific narrative of it, I think it is probably beneficial, or will be beneficial. Like there's World of Warcraft's trying this new thing right now called the World Soul Saga, and they've announced the next 3 expansions, which is unheard of. They've never done this before. We know the names and the general arcing plot line over these 3 expansions. And my hope with this is that we do less like beat by beat story narrative, which I don't think they're very good at, and more like, isn't this a cool place that you want to explore? Like there's a zone
Hmm.
in the War Within, the expansion that's coming out, called Hollow Fall, I think it's called. And there's this like giant fucking crystal. It's an underground zone, but there's like a giant fucking crystal in the ceiling that is essentially serving as the sun for the people that live here. And I don't know the story of this. I don't necessarily need to know the story of this, but I just think it's cool to create an environment and let the story kind of tell itself. Um,
Yeah, I think that WoW needs to, or Blizzard needs to realize too that like their supplementary materials are way better at telling their story than their game is.
yeah,
So like,
but isn't that's a huge problem? And their
yeah,
reliance on those supplementary materials is a huge problem. Because I shouldn't have to read a book to know what's going on in the video game I'm playing.
that's true. That's true. I agree that the cutscene way of telling story is it's rough. Like it, in essence, like everybody experiences the same thing.
Hmm.
Whereas like when you are interacting with the story or whatever, like if I want to just ignore somebody, I want to be able to just ignore them.
Yeah, yeah,
But I think that hopefully, as you know, things are going to have to speed up since they are introducing these next 3 expansions, and you know their cadence is shortening.
hmm,
Hopefully, like you said, there's less beat to beat story and it's more overarching kind of lore and like this is why we're here and
yeah,
go do the thing that we want to do in the raid and that be your story experience, not watch this 10-minute cutscene on,
yeah. Watch
you
these
know.
2 other characters that aren't me decide the
Yeah.
fate of the universe. It's like
Yeah.
I don't care about that. Yeah. Yeah, I hope so. I really do. And again, it's like I don't need story from these games. Like I find enjoyment. Like I guess like, that's a question. And I've seen some WoW content creators echo this idea. Some of like the really big into Mythic Plus WoW streamers have basically made a claim that like if they took Mythic Plus out of the World of Warcraft and just made a standalone game where you like log in, you have your character, and you just like group up with people in like a lobby system and just do Mythic Plus and that's it. Like that's their ideal version of the game. Is is that your ideal version of the game? I know it's like the thing you like to do the most in this game, but is that like I feel like I would not want that actually.
As somebody who's played League of Legends before, no, I don't think I'd want that. Because essentially you're just rolling the dice at that point every time you log in and it's like,
Yeah,
do I get into a good lobby or do I not? And you
sure.
know, the other part of the game where, you know, there is the story and there's rating and everything else, like I don't do everything the game has to offer. I mean, it's not all for me, but I do more than just one finite thing typically.
Yeah.
So I definitely don't think that that would be my ideal version of the game. Um, but that's my personal opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I agree with you on that. I would not like Mythic Plus the game. I think it as a game mode in this larger game, I think is the ideal. But
Yeah.
it is its own separate game, I think. No, no.
Yeah.
Um
I also am curious because a lot of the big time you know, end game players in World of Warcraft, for example, almost don't know even what the story is, which
yeah,
is
that's
interesting
true.
to me because if you talk to somebody who plays Final Fantasy and is their like main game, and their big content creator in that, they can probably tell you like verbatim the story from uh the very beginning, probably. So
Yeah,
it's weird, the different dynamics there.
it is, and I think that is, Final Fantasy is a game series that pushes story more, and so it's an MMO that pushes story more. So I guess that makes sense. But yeah, it is kind of hilarious how like the biggest name, like the best players at World of Warcraft, know the most about how to do the raids and dungeons, but the least about what why we're
Well,
here.
why are we there?
Who
Yeah.
is this guy? Um, what is the point? What is the point of all this? They don't care, and it's
Mhm.
fine. Like the thing I like about these games, and the thing that I think that games are doing broadly, but also these games in World of Warcraft specifically, is they are creating content that is functioning and works for all people.
Yeah.
Like there's people, you mentioned them. Like there's people that only solo in World of Warcraft
Yep.
and only do the solo content. Like they don't even do the group content at all, not even in pugs. They just do like the story of the expansion, and then and it's a lot of people. It's possibly the most amount of people.
Well,
And
yeah.
I don't understand that. Like
I
I don't like I I like the game for the parts of the game I like, and I don't understand why a person like if I'm playing World of Warcraft completely single player, like there's 20 other RPGs that are single player that I would rather be playing. That
I
I don't think that's the strength of the game is the single player game experience. But there's a lot of people that love it, and the game is trying to cater to those people in some ways, which I think is cool.
Yeah, I do completely agree. I would not play WoW if it was just me playing by myself every day.
Ugh,
I
no,
try to do that, regularly throughout playing retail whenever people aren't online. And it's like I log in and I sit there and I'm like, do I really want to do this, or do I just want to wait until like two or three more people get on? It's like,
yeah,
I'd rather wait for two or three more people to get on. But no, I do think it is a majority, right? Like it has
yeah,
to be, because in
hmm
the new expansion, they're coming out with this whole new raid difficulty that is story mode. And so, like, if that's the case, like, there has to be a large number of people who want that, who
yeah.
Blizzard feels like that will cater to. And so, if that isn't the majority of players, it seems like a weird feature to devote a lot of time towards, right?
Yeah. And honestly, I think as we kind of maybe near the end of this conversation, I think that's the biggest problem with these games going forward. That's the biggest problem they have to figure out is there are so many people in these games are so expensive, and so they have to appeal to as many people as possible, and so many different people have different ideas about what these games should be. You and I have just had a conversation for an hour about what we think is the strength of these games and the weaknesses of these games and the good parts of the old version and the good parts of the new version, and and two different people could get on a mic and have a similar conversation and say the exact opposite, right? That like these were the
Yep.
great parts about the old one, here's the great parts about the modern ones, and it could be the opposite of what we said. And
Mhm.
I mean, I was curious because I didn't actually know much about Ashes of Creation, which is this MMO that's being created.
Oh, yeah. Super excited for that, by the way.
Yeah, it's billing itself as this really interesting like dynamic world thing where like the world is not set in stone, things are going to be constantly changing, like towns are going to spring up, and like it is being very aggressive in its goals, and it's
Mhm.
in a way that gets my attention a little bit. But then like I went to the forums on the website for it, and I just like poked my head in the forums, and there's like 100 people bitching about like a bunch of different stuff in the game. Like this one guy's like, I was really excited about this game, and then I saw the spell particle effects, and they're like too colorful, and now my excitement for the game is ruined. It just doesn't match the world. And I'm like, this is what we're talking about, though. This is the impossible task of these games. Is everyone wants something different, and I think that
Yeah.
the strength of World of Warcraft is that they've over the course of time, over the 20 years with this game, they've managed to split the game into modes essentially that everyone can kind of get what they want out of it. And I think that does ultimately hurt some of the modes. Um like I think you and I would probably agree that Mythic Plus doesn't get the attention we would like it to get, because it is
Hmm.
the primary mode that we engage with the game. This 5-man dungeon content is primarily how we engage with the game. We say we do other stuff, and we do, but this is and so we think every bit of development time should be going to this mode, because that's my mode. Yeah, and the hardcore Mythic Raiders would say the same thing about their mode, and of course the more casual people would say the same thing, and it's like an impossible task to balance all this stuff. And I'm not like, we've talked glowingly about this game. I don't think Blizzard's done a perfect job of this game. Even in the time I've come back, they've made some mistakes. They've made some choices that I don't agree with, and I think there's some things they need to fix. But I think it's almost like them with 20 years of systems and iteration built into it versus a game just starting out. It seems like an almost impossible task to release a game like this
Yeah.
fresh right now.
Yeah, I do empathize for game developers in today's gaming society, because you have so many people from so many different like walks of life and so many different wanting, like they want different things from your game, and
Yeah,
everybody wants to play the popular games. So it is a Herculean task to really get everybody excited and happy.
yeah,
Um, and no, I don't think it's been done correctly 100% of the time by Blizzard, but as evident from people continuing to play the game, I do think that they are at least taking strides in the right direction.
yeah,
Um, so it's not easy, and it is annoying when if you feel like you're kind of being ignored, like opinions are getting voiced on things that you feel like should be fixed, and
yeah,
then they just don't get fixed. And then they come out with a content update that you know you're never going to interact with, and you're like, "What are we doing here, folks?" And it's
yeah,
like, well, not every update needs to be for me. It doesn't always need to be for everybody, right? So
hmm,
it just it, it's an ever changing landscape, and I think that it's something to where like this segregation of difficulty is a good thing, because it keeps so many different types of players playing your game,
yeah,
but it's also a difficult thing in the fact that like not only are you now having to have either specific teams or specific content updates for just one type of player,
yeah,
but now you have a whole nother like potential balancing issue. You open yourselves up to all these other different things. So
yeah,
I don't really know how a developer goes forward and, pleases everybody. And honestly, they probably won't and never will. But
yeah.
pleasing the majority is kind of, I guess, where you got to land.
Yeah, I think the raid difficulty thing is a really interesting topic, because World of Warcraft has one, two, three, four, and I guess coming soon 5 different levels of difficulty within the raids.
Hmm.
Um, and that is like I agree. I think it's great, because like where the raids are one of the big selling points of World of Warcraft, and having people of all different skill levels getting to experience those fights is cool and good. But also, yeah, it has to have an effect on design, right? Because
Hmm.
now you have to be conscious in your design that this is a fight that needs to either scale up from its original design to be more difficult for Mythic, or be scalable down from its original design to function on the lower difficulties. And like, we've done fights on normal mode in this raid, which is called normal mode because it's the base mode, and it's like, I feel like this boss is missing something. I
Yeah,
feel
just
like this boss
laughably
is
easy.
missing, yeah, it's missing it's not even that it's easy, it's just that it feels like it's missing mechanics. Like there's just nothing here. And lo and behold, if you look at the Mythic version of the fight, it's got like 3 additional mechanics that they carved out because they were too hard. And it's like, so yeah, I mean, you do create, when you're I do think you're basically making a decision that when you're going to build something that has to operate on 4 separate difficulties simultaneously, that each one of them is going to suffer a little bit. That like there's going
Hmm.
to be a loss of focus a little bit across the board. Um, but I obviously think that's a trade off that they're willing to make, that they've decided is worth it. Um, And I mostly agree. Like the one thing I haven't done in this game since I came back is mythic rating is the hardest difficulty of rating, because it requires 20 people, and we have never been in a group with 20 people. That's a hard level of people to maintain, um, and it's also like probably the most time consuming thing in the game is to mythic progress, because you're talking hundreds of boss pulls before you kill it.
Yep.
I would like to see that before my time with this game ends. I would like to get to experience mythic rating, but haven't done it yet. But
Mhm.
man, it's a good talk. I don't know if we solved anything, but
Uh, I definitely don't think we solved anything, but I don't think I
I
get
don't know if
paid
that was
enough
the
to
goal.
solve the questions here.
Yeah, yeah. I guess in your mind, like looking forward 20 years, like what do you think an MMORPG looks like in 2044?
What does it look like, or what do I want it to look like?
Both. I mean, yeah, like both.
I think if things continue the way that they are, MMOs are going to continue kind of the same trajectory that they are right now, where like if they want to stay healthy, they're going to have this like separation of difficulty where, you know, the majority of the masses who are playing for story or are playing by themselves or anything like that has to continue. If you take away the like solo ability of your game
Yeah.
as an MMO, I don't see it succeeding. So I think that that has to continue. Um, and then I think that on the other side of that, though, like you have to keep your hardcore player base still. So that means you still have to be coming out with difficult content, time consuming, chase goals, things like that. Um,
Mhm.
so I think the trajectory of MMOs is, for the most part, it's going to stay the same. It's going to stay somewhat more casual focused with a more and more increasingly complex top end.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that that's kind of how MMOs are going to progress. Now,
Yeah.
my personal ask for an MMO, uh, uh, selfishly, would be, you know, let's cut out a lot of the content that is what I would consider, extremely easy for me and things that I find more of a chore than things that I want to do.
Yeah.
Um, and then bring in some more potentially social aspects. So, the best example that I can give of this, and I don't know if you ever dabbled with New World at all,
Mm-mm.
um, but there is like a governing system, and Ashes has this as well, whereas like a guild can hold a city, and like that is something you can strive for. I think that's really cool. And if it executed correctly, and the ability to overthrow the guild or whatever, and ability to hold your land is executed correctly, that is like super ideal for me. I like that a lot. Um, so I would like that in whatever MMO happens in 2044 personally. But that being said, the biggest number one thing that I think all MMOs need, and it's really what's missing from a lot of things that aren't World of Warcraft for me, is repeatable content. Like the fact
Yeah.
that I can log in and I can do Mythic Plus endlessly for the entire week. Albeit after 8 or whatever, you don't get like your bonus weekly reward or whatever, but you can continue to do it. I think that
Yeah.
that has to be there for me. If that isn't
Yeah.
there, I'm probably not playing the game.
I agree. I mean, I've enjoyed my time with Final Fantasy 14 when I played it, but that is the one thing it's missing is that kind of scaling difficulty content. Like Mythic Plus gets more, it's harder and harder the higher up in levels you go, and
Mhm.
Final Fantasy doesn't have anything like that. And I think like that I like to be challenged in these type of games. I'm not like the top end type player that wants like we got to a pretty high level in Mythic Plus in the last season.
Mhm.
And we were getting to the point where it stopped being fun for me. Like when
Yep.
you eventually progress to a difficulty level that like some people find really really fun, which is like the very very ticky tacky min maxing stuff that like this thing will kill you unless you do this specific sequence of things perfectly every single time,
Yep.
and just no room for error. Like at a point I just get bored of that, because it's like I could probably get there. I could probably like just like the amount of extra work and skill to get like one level up just becomes exponentially more to the
Mhm.
point where it stops being fun to me. But just the fact that I can even get to that part is really cool, and that it's fresh and new challenges each time. Mythic Plus, folks, in World of Warcraft, really cool system. It has its problems, but really cool idea. Every MMO should do something like this.
Yeah, I agree, and I agree with your first point as well. Like the needing to play perfect for 30 to 45 minutes straight is not something that I find
Yeah,
enjoyable. Like
but some
I
people
like to
love
be able
that.
to
Like,
make mistakes.
yeah, yeah. I mean, so like the Elden Ring type players, the Soulsborne players that really like very precise, difficult mechanics that you have to learn. Like, there are people that like that, and I mean, there's Mythic players that we watch content that like love this like minute difficult like it's really tough, but they love that. And again, it's cool that they have that this mode provides that for them, while also for me providing like getting up to like 25 level key, 26 level keys, like that type of thing
Mhm.
in Mythic Plus. But never touching the 30s or whatever that the best people will do. um
Yeah, having to play perfectly for a stint of 2 minutes is fine for me. Having to play
yeah,
perfectly without blinking for 45 minutes is not my cup of tea.
no, no, yeah,
So I
yeah.
agree with you.
I think I agree with your general assessment of where things are going. I do wonder, and like it's impossible to know what this is because like by its very definition, it's unknowable. But I wonder if there is some kind of like dynamic, huge shift in design that is coming down the road. Like pretty much, I think since 2004, we've been iterating on the MMORPG idea. Like, World of Warcraft came out. It itself was an iteration on EverQuest and the games that came before it, but it redefined it and kind of planted a flag, and this is what we're gonna do. WoW has continued to iterate over the course of its life, and games have responded to that and iterated on that concept, and it's this constant iteration, and I love that. But I really like wonder if there's like a game changer idea out there that just like does something so incredibly different that like we can't even think about what that thing would be right now.
Yeah, I don't know of something that hasn't like technically already been done. I think the biggest thing that is going to be picked up at least by World of Warcraft in the coming years is more. The game already respects your time a lot more than it did 20 years
Hmm.
ago. I think it's going to continue to get more and more that way, though, and we're seeing that with the next expansion coming out. You have like account progression rather than like specific character
Yeah,
progression tied to some things, and I think that that's being borrowed from potentially Final Fantasy, since you are one character and technically you progress that all on its own.
yeah,
I don't know as far as like some unknown unseen thing. Really, I think that there's not a way that I could see anything like majorly shifting, but I'm happy to be surprised. I
yeah.
want the genre to continue to get better. So
Hmm.
if some developer does have that, the node system in Ashes that they're talking about, where like what players do in this particular portion of the world changes that particular portion of the world. I
Yeah,
think that that could be genre defining if it works correctly.
that could be really cool. I also, the cynical part of me says like players are just gonna find a way to min max that
Oh, they are. Yeah.
into shit, like to into like I think I can't remember who said the quote, but like never underestimate um someone's ability to like exploit the fun out of a system.
Mhm.
And World of Warcraft players just this is what they do. They just like take a system and they're like, what is the best way to completely rob the system of all the fun, but make it maximally efficient for whatever gain I'm hoping to get.
Mhm.
So yeah, I read stuff like that, and on paper, all those ideas sound really really cool and really really exciting. And I'm just like, okay, but like, what's it going to look like in actual application with like real people that suck? What
Yep.
they're going to do to this thing?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely don't think that it is a thing that I'm looking towards being like this huge thing.
Mhm.
I think it's going to be pretty integral to that game, but I think if executed correctly, that could be something that causes like a huge shakeup in the genre, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I think you're right. The other thing I want to mention, just I don't want to say the boogeyman word, but AI I think has a pretty
True.
large chance of fundamentally changing how we design these games. I mean, like one thing I keep thinking of over and over again is just like, what if we get to a point where AI is so good? Like we already have procedurally generated levels in games, right? And those are getting better and better and better. But it's like when we have like full AI in these games that can just literally like spit out a dungeon whole cloth for you. That's not just using like procedural pieces and you know Lego blocking them together, but it's just like creating something just
That
from
could bring
scratch.
back that exploration feel, to be
It
honest.
could. It could.
That
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
would be really interesting.
Yeah, because the biggest problem that they have is that these rabid MMO consumers will just consume content faster than developers could ever hope to create it, and so they need to build this content to be repeatable. And when content needs to be repeatable, it eventually needs to be quick because while
Mhm.
it's fun to explore the giant dungeon that takes 2 hours to explore the first time, I don't want to do that the second time, the third time, the fourth time.
Right.
And so, but suddenly, if we can develop 5 completely independent new dungeons and spin them up instantly, then that worry goes away. That yeah, I don't care if this takes a long time because it's all new to me.
Yeah, that is a very cool food for thought kind of thing. I
Hmm.
I would love to see if something like that ever comes to be. I think that would be an awesome kind of like test of the
Yeah,
waters of like procedurally generated slash AI generated stuff within an
yeah,
MMO. And I don't know. Just thinking about it has a lot of positives in my head. Um, my worry is things like that are not perfect, and so you
no,
probably get
certainly not.
yourself
Yeah.
into like, oh well, it's random, but it really just feels like the last 14 times I've run into this area.
Yeah, I mean, and that's often what procedural stuff feels like to me now, where it's just like, I love roguelikes. Well, okay, I have a complicated relationship with roguelikes. I like some roguelikes, like I like Hades, um, and I like these things that use these procedurally generated things where each run is different, but also like you can definitely tell this is a procedurally generated thing. It's same palette. We just kind of move stuff around. It's all
Yep.
it's all the same essentially. It's just the map is slightly different. Um, I think there is an opportunity. I think you're right to you know I know AI is a boogeyman, but with the power of doing things through AI, I think has the potential of doing something really interesting in video
Yeah.
game development. And I don't know what it is yet. And obviously I don't want to take video game developers out of work, which is it's a very turbulent industry right now. I don't want to
Yeah,
like say,
unfortunately.
well, we don't need developers anymore because I still think you do need developers. It's just you can I don't know. I don't know enough about the topic. I don't know enough about game development. I just like think about these things and what they could do. And it seems like it could be pretty cool.
Yeah, I definitely think as like an assistant to try to help solve some of these issues, it'd be interesting. I
Hmm.
definitely think that somebody still needs to be making the decisions,
Yeah,
or else like, you know, for example, AI learns from things, right? So if you
hmm,
have a vocal minority, then it's going to start catering towards that minority, which is going to drive
sure.
away the majority of your players. So it has its own issues. There definitely still needs to be a human element, in my opinion. So
Sure.
I
Yeah.
don't think that it's taking any jobs away currently, and I fear for the time that it does, seeing as I am in the software field myself. So
Fair. Fair. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I guess we'll reconvene in 20 years and see how the genre is doing. But no, this was really good. This I had a lot of fun with this. Once again, if you are curious about these games, I think World of Warcraft's in a pretty good spot right now. It's a bit in a bit of a lull content wise because we're gearing up for the next expansion coming in the fall. But I think it's the most user friendly, respect your time version of the game that I think it ever has been, at least in my experience. And if you're curious about it, you should check it out. Or you should check us out, because actually we're going to be like I said, we're playing Cataclysm, the Cataclysm Classic, and I think I'm going to be streaming our raid. We start our first raid with that tomorrow or today, as you're listening to this episode. If you're listening on the 31st, we're going to be raiding from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern time.
Yep.
Tomorrow, the day that you were listening,
the 31st.
Over on the Doof Media Twitch. So that's twitch.tv/Doof Media. We're gonna be live streaming that, so you can come hang out, see what this whole game's all about, see what ratings like. Should be fun time. I think you have a Twitch as well. Do you want to plug yours? Or you might be streaming as well.
Yeah, I might be streaming it as well. So that would be twitch.tv/squirrel tots. Squirrel like the animal, tots like tater tots.
Like the tater. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, should come hang out, chat with us tomorrow. If you have any thoughts about MMORPGs in general, EverQuest, World of Warcraft, maybe some of the ones we didn't talk about as much. I think neither of us has a full like holistic experience in every single one of these games, because there've been so many and they've iterated on so many different things. Yeah, you should let us know. We want to hear from you. You can reach out via email at doofmedia@gmail.com or over on our Twitter account at doofmedia. You can also go to the Doof Media subreddit. That's r/doofmedia, which will have a link for this very episode. Talk to us about your MMO experiences. Have you played them? Do you play them now? Do you think it's ridiculous that people still play World of Warcraft? Because I did until I played it, and then I liked it. It was pretty good. It's a pretty good game.
It's a very good game.
Yeah, Tevin, thanks so much for coming on. This has been great. It's been you and I talk about this stuff all the time, just on Discord, but it's good to get you on the call and actually chat about it.
Hey, no, I appreciate you having me, and I love to have these conversations. We like I said, chat ad nauseum at this. So
yeah. There's a lot to say. There's a lot to talk about. These games are usually really complicated with lots of interacting systems, and those are fun things to talk about. And also why the story of Final Fantasy XIV is awful. Just worst, just the absolute worst. Just making sure we piss off people collectively, right? You know, you gotta make everyone.
I know somebody specifically we need to send this episode to.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you again, Tevin, and thanks everyone for listening. You can find this and all of our shows over at doofmedia.com. And if you like what we do here, want to support us, you can become a patron of Doof Media. Head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia. You can pledge at any of the available levels. I do think we have like a bonus episode where I talked with Matt about raiding in World of Warcraft like 2 years ago, because it was right when I just got back into it and I needed to talk about it. I think we released that as a bonus episode for our patrons, so you can head over to Patreon and check that out there. Also, please consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. Each review helps us get more exposure and introduces new people to all the content we make here. This episode probably not indicative of our normal content, but still pretty fun if you ask me. All right, next week Matt will be back, and we'll be back on our Deconstructing Darren Aronofsky series. We're going to be taking a look at Aronofsky's fifth film, which is the divisive, interesting Noah, about the story of the guy who built the boat and survived on the rains. I haven't watched Noah yet, so I don't know a lot about it. But we'll be talking about that next week. Thanks again, Tevin.
Hey, thank you.
We'll see you all next week.
My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say. My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say.